Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Now we are also available on Telegram, so join our Telegram channel by clicking on the link that is available in the description below to get the latest updates from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 24th June 2021, and the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. Now, in our series of weekly mains answer writing practice from the Daily News Simplified, we have taken up this particular question which reads: do you agree that the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Program has lived up to its expectations? Highlight the challenges faced by the officials in implementing the program. So, this question is for 10 marks and 150 words, and you can post your answers in the comment box on the eLearn platform. The link for this has been provided in the description box below. So do post your answers and get them evaluated by the faculties at Rouse IAS. With this, let's start the discussion of today's newspaper. Now, this article on page number 6 has been written in the context of the Prime Minister of India meeting the leaders of Jammu and Kashmir. And this meeting has come almost 22 months after the abrogation of Article 370 and the subsequent arrests of the political leaders of the Jammu and Kashmir. So this article mainly deals with two important issues. First is that the government of India has not been successful in achieving the objectives that it had proclaimed while abrogating the Article 370 in the Jammu and Kashmir. Second issue is that the present outreach by the central government to the local leaders of Jammu and Kashmir, and also Pakistan has toned down its rhetoric on Kashmir issue. And both these events highlight that Kashmir issue is becoming a part of the larger geopolitics that is at play in the region. So in this background, let us try and understand what exactly were the objectives of the government of India at the time of abrogation of Article 370. And also at this point, the government of India had proclaimed that the Kashmir issue is an internal matter of India and no external interference is required. However, the manner in which the Kashmir issue has played out highlights that it has become a part of the larger geopolitics that is at play in the region. So in this article, let us try and understand what exactly were the objectives of the government of India when it abrogated the Article 370 in the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, and also how the geopolitics of the region is shaping up India and Pakistan's stand on the Jammu and Kashmir issue. Let us understand these issues in detail now. Now, what exactly were the objectives of abrogation of Article 370 and the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir Act as were stated by the Government of India in the Indian Parliament? The first and foremost aim of Government of India that was proclaimed in the Parliament while abrogation of Article 370 was underway was ending terrorism and violence in Jammu and Kashmir. Second goal was flooding the Jammu and Kashmir region with development initiatives and investments from other parts of the country. Thirdly, the government claimed that it will reclaim those parts of the territory which have been occupied by Pakistan and China, that is the Pakistan occupied Kashmir and Aksai Chin. So government had proclaimed that it will reclaim these territories from Pakistan and China, which are the Indian territories. Also, the Home Minister in the parliamentary debate had proclaimed that it will end the rule of political dynasties in Jammu and Kashmir in favor of a new kind of politics and polity, and he termed this as a Naya Kashmir. And last but not the least, internationally, India had communicated that the decision of abrogation of Article 370 and the reorganization of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir was purely an internal matter. And such a move did not affect India's ties with any other country. So in this background, as these were the proclaimed objectives of Government of India when it abrogated the Article 370 of Jammu and Kashmir, let us look at how far the government has been successful in achieving these goals. Now, as we have learned that the first and the foremost goal of the government of India was ending terrorism and violence in the Jammu and Kashmir. So in this line, it has been highlighted that the incidents of terrorism and violence have decreased since 2019. However, it has been highlighted that such decrease in terrorism and the incidences of violence has come down at a very high cost. And this cost is related to the curbs that were imposed on the rights of the citizens of the Jammu and Kashmir. In this line, more than 5,000 people were arrested, and there was the longest internet shutdown in the history of any democracy, and it was for about 213 days. Secondly, the government of India claimed that such a move will lead to increased investments in the economy of Jammu and Kashmir. However, it has been highlighted that the curbs that were imposed by the government of India led to the closure of schools, online education, and also diminishing of resources of income. In this line, the government of India is claiming that it has more than 400 memoranda of understanding from businesses nationwide who are promising to invest in the union territory. However, the success of such kind of memorandum of understandings will only be measured once the money actually comes in, and this is very difficult given the state of national economy, which is witnessing negative growth rate because of the pandemic. So, on both the fronts of terrorism and economy, we have seen that they have come at a very high cost, and also there is no certainty about the promises that have been made by the government of India. Thirdly, the government of India claimed that India will reclaim the territories that are occupied by Pakistan and China, namely Aksai Chin. However, it has been highlighted that this goal looks hardly achievable because of the recent showdown between the forces of India and China at Galwan Valley. And this standoff between the Indian and the Chinese forces has raised the possibility of a two-front war. And this possibility of two-front war was highlighted by the Indian Army Chief himself. Now, two-front war simply means that India will have to face a war on both the fronts, that is on the Pakistan front as well as on the China front, because there is increasing bonhomie between Pakistan and China because of the various investments that are going on between these two countries. Further, as far as India's claim of reclaiming the POK from Pakistan is concerned, the author highlights that the US is unlikely to support India in its POK adventure. This is because it itself is withdrawing from the Afghanistan, and there is increasing strength of Taliban in this particular region. And also we note that Taliban has support from the Pakistan itself. So the issue here is that if India tries to reclaim the territory of POK, the US is likely to not meddle into such issues because of the regional geopolitics related to Afghanistan and its withdrawal from the Afghanistan from a war which has been lingering for past 20 years. Finally, the Home Minister in the Parliament had said that the move of abrogation of Article 370 will lead to ending of the political dynasties. However, the present outreach by the Prime Minister of India to the 14 leaders involves all the previous leaders which the government had claimed to getting rid of in favor of a new polity in Kashmir. So clearly, the government of India has more focused on rhetorics here. However, the reality is something very different now. And this is also reflected in the change of stance of the government of India itself, where earlier it was not ready to talk with the political leaders of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. However, now the PM himself is trying an outreach to these political leaders. Finally, the government of India claimed that Jammu and Kashmir was an internal matter of India, and the events of abrogation of Article 370 and the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir will not impact India's relations with other international countries. However, if you look at the reality, Jammu and Kashmir issue has now been discussed in more capitals as compared to earlier. Further, the issue of Jammu and Kashmir has been discussed in the US Congress, in the parliaments in United Kingdom, the European Union, and also in the Nordic countries. Further, several delegations of the European Union's parliamentarians, ambassadors, and UN diplomats have been escorted to the valley by the government of India to elicit their approval for the situation there. So the government of India itself is trying to get an approval from the ambassadors and the UN diplomats and the EU parliamentarians about the situation in the Jammu and Kashmir. Now this is clearly visible from these headlines that the envoys visit Jammu and Kashmir amid cheers and protests. And at the same time, these visits that happened from the European Union called for ending of all the curbs in Jammu and Kashmir. So clearly, although India claimed that it was an internal matter of India, India itself had approved the visits of these envoys from EU and United Nations, and they highlighted the issue of rights of people of the Jammu and Kashmir. Further, the Jammu and Kashmir dispute has been discussed at least 3 times at the UN Security Council, and this issue did not come up in front of UN Security Council since 1971 when there was a war between India and Pakistan. So it has been argued that the process of outreach to the political leaders and the statements about making Jammu and Kashmir a state again by the Home Minister indicates that these changes have come because of external considerations. And the issue of Jammu and Kashmir is not just an internal matter, but the way in which the government of India is dealing with it is also highlighting that it is doing so based on external considerations. So you can clearly see in this headline that Jammu and Kashmir will become a state again, and this has been highlighted by the Home Minister of India. So clearly there is a change in stance of the Home Ministry itself. Now, what has been Pakistan's stand on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir? Now, presently we note that India and Pakistan are both involved in a dialogue which is known as Back Channel Dialogue, which has been mediated by the United Arab Emirates. And we have discussed this issue of back channel diplomacy and the mediation of United Arab Emirates in the DNS of 12th April 2021. Do go through this DNS to understand more about the dialogue that is going on between India and Pakistan. Now, because of such mediation between India and Pakistan through a back channel diplomacy, there has been a change in stance of the Pakistan towards the Jammu and Kashmir issue. And this was clearly highlighted when Pakistan did not mention its previous demands of plebiscite and UN resolutions. Now, since the starting of the Jammu and Kashmir issue, Pakistan has been demanding a UN-backed plebiscite in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. However, India has refused to conduct such a plebiscite because of the change in demography that has taken place in the state or the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. And India has said that Jammu and Kashmir is a sovereign part of India and it is an internal matter and will not be taken to UN. And also, after the Shimla Agreement of 1971, India has said that all the issues between India and Pakistan will be dealt with bilaterally and they cannot be taken to United Nations. So earlier, the Pakistan was demanding plebiscite in Jammu and Kashmir and also the involvement of United Nations. However, in the present or the recent statements, it did not mention its previous demands of plebiscite and the UN resolutions. Further, Pakistan's PM has also said that he would be willing to talk if there was a reversal in some of the August 5 steps or if India proffers a roadmap on Jammu and Kashmir. Now, August 5 is the date on which the abrogation of Article 370 took place. So basically, all the decisions related to Jammu and Kashmir are termed as August 5 decision or August 5 steps. So the PM of Pakistan has said that he is willing to talk with India if India considers the reversal in some of the August 5 steps and also if India offers a roadmap on Jammu and Kashmir. And we have already seen that India has also stated that it is trying to reverse some of the decisions that it had taken on August 5 regarding the abrogation of Article 370. And we have seen that the Home Minister of India himself has said that Jammu and Kashmir will become a state at the right time. So clearly that is a change in stance of the government of India. Also, Pakistan has now been insisting on restoration of Article 370. However, earlier or previously, Pakistan itself had rejected the Article 370's validity in the Jammu and Kashmir. So this is also clearly a visible change in stance of Pakistan. So both India and Pakistan, their stances are changing as far as the Jammu and Kashmir issue is concerned. So it is being said that the downturn in Pakistan-backed violence in Jammu and Kashmir as well as the softening of the rhetoric suggests a flexibility born out of international pressure as well as sustained threat of a Pakistan blacklisting by the Financial Action Task Force. So clearly this change in stance of Pakistan on the Jammu and Kashmir issue is because of the international pressures and also the sustained threat of Pakistan getting blacklisted under the Financial Action Task Force blacklist. And that will be detrimental to Pakistan's economy. So that is why, because of such external pressures, Pakistan has been changing its stance on the Jammu and Kashmir issue of late. Now, why have both India and Pakistan changed their stance? Let us look at this particular point. Now, it is being said that the change in stance of both India and Pakistan clearly highlight that these changes have come because of external prompting from the United States of America, which is keen to complete its Afghanistan pullout and its negotiations with the Taliban. So both India and Pakistan have changed their stances because of the presence of US in the region and the withdrawal of United States of America from the Afghanistan, and also US wants both India and Pakistan to negotiate with Taliban. Further, countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar and UAE have been nudging both India and Pakistan to get involved in a dialogue. And clearly we have seen that in a previous DNS video, we have discussed the back channel diplomacy that is going on between India and Pakistan because of the mediation by the UAE. Now earlier, as far as the Afghan issue was concerned, India had clearly stated that it will not indulge in talks with Taliban. However, recently, the special envoys of Qatar had highlighted that the Indian officials have engaged with the Taliban leadership in the Doha, where the Afghan peace process talks are going on. So clearly, both India and Pakistan have been changing their stance because of the geopolitics that is going on in the region. However, the larger geopolitical context is that there is US China confrontation that is going on in the Indo Pacific region. And this is becoming the center of geopolitics right now. And this is clearly highlighted in the initiatives of the US and the collaboration with India in terms of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue or the Malabar Naval Exercise. So the US-China confrontation is now becoming the center of geopolitics. And in this context, it has been highlighted that due to this, India's global strategies will further be put to test. So in this line, the author highlights that the US's expectation of cooperation from India to its east on China and the Indo-Pacific in terms of collaborations in the form of Quad and Malabar Security Dialogue have clearly not been commensurate with India's expectation that America would reduce India's threats to its west from Afghanistan and Pakistan. So although on the one hand, United States of America wants India's cooperation to counter China in the Indo-Pacific region, however, the US has not supported India in terms of reducing the threats for India's internal security on the western front, that is, on the front with Pakistan and Afghanistan. And we note that this is the front where India is suffering from the issue of terrorism. So clearly in this article, we have seen that the objectives that Government of India had proclaimed while abrogating Article 370 have not been met. And also, as claimed by the Government of India that Jammu and Kashmir is an internal matter does not seem true, because India and Pakistan both have been taking their stance on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir because of the international pressures and also the larger geopolitical context that is playing. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 7 has been written in the context of a new circular that has been brought out by the UGC or the University Grant Commission. And this new circular proposes that all the higher education institutions in India should teach 40% of any course online, while rest 60% should be taught offline. Now, although this looks like a promising step, however, there are certain issues related to higher education in India which need to be addressed first in order to make this proposal of UGC effective. In this background, the points that we discuss here in the form of pros and cons of this circular and also some of the recommendations will become important for us from General Studies Paper 2 point of view, in which education and health related initiatives are very important for us from the mains examination perspective. And if you look at the previous year question papers, you will find that in the year 2020, a question was asked related to the new education policy that was introduced in 2020. So this was a fairly predictable question in the mains examination because the new education policy was released in 2020 itself. Secondly, if you look at these two questions, they were asked in the year 2016 and both are related to improving education system in India. And also, this question was asked in 2014. So all these questions highlight that education is one of the important themes in the General Studies mains paper 2. So in a similar manner, you should identify the important themes in all the papers for the mains examination preparation. Now, as we have seen that education is one of the important themes, so based on this circular, we have created this practice question. And you can try and answer this question by using some of the points that we discuss here. So the question reads, recent circular of University Grant Commission which proposes all higher educational institutions to teach 40% of any course online and the rest 60% offline is promising but not sufficient to improve the higher education in India. Analyze the pros and cons of the circular. What can be done to improve the learning outcomes in higher education? So let us look at the pros and cons of the circular and also some of the recommendations for improving higher education in India. Now, as the UGC has recommended that 40% of the courses should be given or provided online, while 60% should be taught offline. So one of the important positives of such an initiative is that in the recent or the present times where we have seen that it is not possible for the students to attend the college, online teaching is looking very promising, and as such, it can lead to increased student engagement in the learning process. However, one of the crucial issues or negatives of such an initiative is that, according to latest All India Survey on Higher Education, it shows that about 60% of the 42,342 colleges in India are in rural areas. That is, 60% of the colleges are in rural areas, while 78% of the all the colleges in India are privately managed. And these institutions hardly have any digital platform of education. And as such, the implementation of such an ambitious initiative will be doubtful because of the lack of proper digital platform of education in the rural areas and the privately managed institutions. Secondly, one of the positives of the online learning can be enhanced student teacher interactions and improved student learning outcomes. However, it has been argued that only the big corporates are better placed to invest in technology and provide such high level of learning, and it would not be possible for all the colleges in India to provide such high quality learning by using technology. Further, the online learning can provide more flexible teachings and learning environments. However, as far as internet penetration is concerned in India, it is only about 45%, which questions the efficacy of such a circular. Another positive of the online learning can be increased opportunity for institutional collaborations at distance, and this will enable the teachers to have greater influence and effect on the students' learning. However, it has been argued that it leaves little room for all round formation of the student that includes the development of their IQ, EQ, social quotient, physical quotient, and spiritual quotient. So, more amount of control by the teachers on the students is likely to impact these particular outcomes related to emotional quotient, social quotient, physical quotient, etc. Further, it has been argued that online learning will boost enhanced self learning. However, it has been argued that there is no substitute to offline learning because listening part and subsequent interaction with the teachers may get minimized in the online format, and that can be detrimental to the students. Then, regarding the online learning, it has been argued that it shifts the role of teacher from being a knowledge provider to a coach or a mentor. But in case of offline studies, it has been argued that students have different learning capacities and all of them cannot adapt to online courses. Regarding online courses, it is argued that it is student driven, bottom up, and customized. However, regarding offline courses, it is argued that low per capita income reduces the chances of having digital equipment, and as such, it creates a digital divide. Besides this, the online education introduces flexibility in assessment and evaluation patterns as well. So, we have clearly seen there are some pros as well as some cons of this particular initiative of imparting 40% of the course in an online format, while 60% in an offline format. So, as we have seen that there are certain cons or limitations of providing online education, let us look at some of the recommendations which can be done in order to improve learning outcomes of higher education in India. So, what could be one of the first suggestions? The first suggestion will be mainly targeted at bridging the digital divide, and that is why the Government of India should ensure equity in access to technology and bandwidth for all higher education institutions across the country free of the cost. Because we have seen that around 60% of the colleges of India are in rural areas which lack high connectivity or high internet connectivity. Second important thing that the Government of India needs to do is massive digital training programs must be arranged for teachers, and that is how the teachers can improve their quality of imparting knowledge in an online platform. Thirdly, the teacher-student ratio needs to be readjusted in order to provide the blended learning of online and offline formats effectively. Now, we already know that there is lack of enough teachers at the higher education institutions, and accordingly, appointment of a greater number of teachers is also the need of the hour. Besides this, there is a need for designing of the curriculum again, and this should be decentralized and based on a bottom-up approach. Further, in order to provide flexibility at the ground level, such power of making education related policy making should be vested in the state governments. Also, the government must think of overhauling the curriculum at the school level as well so that it can be effective in improving the learning outcomes at the higher education level. Last but not the least, periodical discussions, feedback mechanisms, and support services at all the levels would revitalize the implementation of learning program of National Education Policy 2020. So these are few recommendations that can help in improving the learning outcomes based on the usage of digital technology. And the points that we have discussed here can be used in answering the practice question that was provided at the starting of the discussion. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 7 has come into news because the Tamil Nadu government has decided to stop using the term central government in its official communications, and the state government of Tamil Nadu will replace the term central government by the term union government. So, this is basically an assertion of federalism by the state government of Tamil Nadu. Now, although the points that we discuss here are not very important for us from the exam point of view, but this calls us to go through the basic or static chapter of Indian polity from standard textbook like Lakshmikant related to the usage of term union and also the first few articles of the Indian Constitution. So in this background, we will first look at the historical evolution of the usage of the term center or the union government, and how under the Constitution of India the usage of terms like center or federation was avoided carefully, and why was it avoided in the first place. Let us look at these points, and it is recommended that you go through the initial few chapters of the Lakshmikant where this issue is discussed in detail. Now, as far as the usage of the term center is concerned, it originated in the colonial times. So the term center is a carryover from the colonial times, and the administration that was run by the Governor General was often described as the central government to differentiate it from the provincial governments, which is presently known as state government. Further, in 1919 Government of India Act, which was also known as Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms, a rudimentary form of federalism was introduced into India because the subjects between the central and the provincial governments was divided. So the administrative subjects were divided into central and provincial subjects. Also, it was during the 1919 Government of India Act that a new concept known as diarchy was introduced at the provincial level. So 1919 Government of India Act was the introduction or beginning of initial stages of federalism in India, where the administrative subjects were divided between central and the provincial governments. However, in 1935 Government of India Act, the term Federation of India was used for the first time. However, a two federation was never materialized because the princely states did not agree to join such a federation. However, the independent Indian constitution neither used the term federation or center as were being used during the British colonial times. So what was the logic behind not using the terms federation or center in the first place and the usage of term union of states in the Indian constitution? Let us look at that particular logic. So in the Constitution of India, in the Article 1 itself, the term federation or center was not used. And the Article 1 states that India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. So union of states was a term that was preferred over federation of states. And this was done mainly because of two important reasons. First is that Indian Federation is not the result of an agreement among the states like the American Federation. And the states have no right to secede from the federation. And that is why the federation is a union, because it is indestructible. That is, a state cannot leave the Indian state. So these are basically the two reasons why the term union of the states was used. This is mainly because in the United States of America's case, all the states came together and formed a United States of America. However, this was not the case in India because in case of India, the states did not come together to form a federation of states. And that is why our country is an integral whole and has been divided into different states only for the convenience of administration. And that is why the term union of the states has been preferred over federation of states. Secondly, we note that the term center was used during the colonial times. However, the constitution uses the term union over center. This is because the states are neither the agencies of the union nor they derive their powers from central government. And this is because both the union and the states are created by the Constitution of India itself, and both derive their respective authority from the Constitution. And also, the Constitution clearly demarcates the legislative and the executive powers between the union and the state governments. Also, the relation between the union and the states is not of subordination but of coordination. And as such, it has been highlighted that The usage of term center or the central governments points to an unequal relationship between the two governments. Now, although the subjects have been demarcated between the union and the state governments in terms of legislative and the executive powers, however, the Indian constitution has both federal as well as unitary features. Let us look at some of these features, and you can go through the details of those features from the Indian polity book of Lakshmikant. So we note that the Indian constitution has some central or unitary features, while other features are federal features, and that is why the term union has been used and not the central government or the federation of states. Now, some of these unitary features include the appointment of the state governor by the center. That is, the governor of the state is not appointed or elected by the people of the state or by the legislators of the state, but the state governor is appointed by the center. And this shows clearly a unitary feature. Secondly, there are all India services for which the recruitment is organized by the central government. However, they are posted into the state governments. And then there is one important unitary feature in the Indian constitution, that is emergency provisions. These include emergencies that are imposed under Article 356, Article 352 and Article 360. So basically Article 356 deals with president rule that is imposed in the states. Article 352 deals with national emergency, while Article 360 deals with the financial emergency. And all these features are unitary in nature because they make the central government powerful over the state governments. However, there are federal features as well because there are two governments at the union level and the state levels. There is division of powers. That is, in the 7th schedule, the powers have been divided between the central and the state governments in the form of union list, state list and the concurrent list. Also, one of the important features of federal constitution is that the Indian constitution is a written constitution. Also, there is a supremacy of Indian constitution and there is independent judiciary. To know more about these central and federal features, go through the Lakshmikant and the basics of that. So this is a very good opportunity for us to revise these features from the static textbook. However, this issue of usage of the term central government or the union has come into the news because of the strains that are visible in the federal relations in India. And some of these strains are visible in the form of Citizenship Amendment Act, the Farm Bills, the UAPA and the NIA Act, also the GST compensation and the terms of reference of 15 Finance Commission, etc. In this context, it needs to be understood that a diverse and large country like India requires a proper balance between union and the states in terms of legislative, executive and federal matters. Rigid centralization or chaotic decentralization can both lead to weakening of Indian federalism, and as such, the terms and the functionality of the Indian federalism should be taken care of properly by both the union as well as the state governments. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 6 is related to a very important issue that highlights the digital divide in terms of gender. So basically, it deals with the gender technology divide or gender technology gap as has been provided in the headline of this article. So this article basically analyzes the issue of divide in the access to technology between male and females. And the present pandemic has highlighted the importance of technology in providing health and other benefits. And as such, there is a need to bridge this gender technology gap. So let us look at some of the aspects of gender technology gap and how it is impacting the interests of women. So the points that we discuss here can be important for us from General Studies paper 2 point of view in the topic social issues. Now, regarding the gender technology divide or the gender technology gap, it has been highlighted that there is limited or no access to the women related to technology. And according to Global System for Mobile Communication, it estimates that over 390 million women in low and middle income countries do not have access to internet. So this clearly highlights the gender technology divide. And half of these 390 million women which do not have access to internet are in South Asia. And about only 65% women in South Asia own a mobile phone. And when it comes to India, only about 14.9% of the women are reported to be using the internet. And this limited access of women to technology is also hampering their access to vaccination in these tough times. Now, besides women having lack of access to technology, it has also been argued that majority of the technology are men oriented, and it has been argued that most of the technologies that are available to the laypersons are created by men for the men and do not necessarily meet everyone's requirements. And majority of the applications in the app stores on the mobile phones cater to young men, and as such there is lack of women oriented technology. So it has been argued that there is a need for designing apps which are geared specifically towards mothers or apps for women to access telemedicine consultation. Also, digital networks should be provided to connect women to informal job opportunities so that they can earn while balancing caring for their families. Also, in mobile phones, there should be built-in emergency button which should connect women to law enforcement agencies. So these are some of the suggestions for making the technology engendered, that is, it should not just be men oriented but also it should be women friendly or gender friendly. Further, the author has argued that there is a need for making technology engendered, and this has been highlighted through one of the technology that started in 1950s and how it was engendered. So it is argued that in 1950s, dishwashers and washing machines were promoted as a method of emancipating women because the household works of dishwashing and washing of clothes were mainly women centric at that point of time. And household good producers, for example, target most of their advertising at women because they often control the household budget. And digital technology should also be engendered in a similar manner by targeting the technology towards women. Also, the mindset around the technology or digital technology and device ownership must change in the families. So, in the families, also, we see a kind of digital divide that exists. And it is more likely that the father or the sons will be allowed to use the mobile phones exclusively. And in part, this is mainly because of the deeply held cultural beliefs, and it is often believed that women's access to technology will motivate them to challenge the patriarchal societies. And there is also a belief that women need to be protected and that online content can be dangerous for women and expose them to risks. And as a consequence, girls and women who ask for phone face suspicion and opposition. So basically, these are the patriarchal mindsets that hamper the women's access to technology. In this regard, the United Nations has been taking steps in order to make the technology engendered. So the UN Women Program encourages companies to sign up and agree to the principles that will lead to more equitable future for all. And as a part of Generation Equality Forum, the goal is to double the number of women and girls working in technology and innovation. And by 2026, the aim is to reduce the gender digital divide and ensure universal digital literacy while investing in feminist technology and innovation to support women's leadership as innovators. Also, the digital empowerment programs and partnerships such as Equals and International Girls in the International Communication Technology Day celebration across the region, led by the UN Women and International Telecommunication Union, will help more girls to choose STEM, that is science, technology, engineering and mathematics courses as their academic focus and enter digital technology careers and aspire to be the next leaders in digital technology. Now, by making technology engendered, it can have a widespread impact on the world. So according to the GSMA, closing the gender gap in mobile internet usage in low and middle income countries would increase the GDP by US $700 billion over the next 5 years. Further, women and girls are the largest consumer groups left out of technology and could be major profit drivers. Also, we now have the opportunity to shape our future in a way that is more equal, diverse, and sustainable in the world of technology and in the aftermath of medical and socio-economic devastation that we have faced during the pandemic. So, bringing an end to the gender technology gap will save lives and make livelihoods more secure. So, some of the points that we have discussed here can be used in writing answers related to technology and gender, and also in the essay writing related to gender empowerment. With this, we conclude today's discussion, and this is the question for the day.